Right, good afternoon, everyone. Panel, behave yourselves. They're struggling with their tins of water. Listen, it's great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. I'm assuming some of you tried to get in to see Henry and couldn't get in, but it's great to have you here with us. I'm Beccy Speight. I'm the Chief Executive of the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and I'm chairing this panel here today, which I hope is going to be a really interesting conversation, all about kind of how we can get to nature positive by 2030 through farming. So I will say a little bit more about that in a moment. But I thought I'd introduce the panel first of all. So working from nearest to me, we've got Jake Fiennes here, who is the Director of Conservation at the Holcombe Estate and author of a new book. Have you got a copy with you?
No, but there's plenty of copies at the bookshop.
It's called Land Healer, and he tells me he's launching it tonight, so he's having to hot-foot it from here to his own book later on today. And then we've got Martin Lines, who is an arable mixed farmer, but he's also the UK chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And full transparency, he's also a contractor for RSPB on Hope Farm, our farm in Cambridgeshire. Next to Martin, we've got Helen Browning, who is an organic arable and livestock farmer and also Chief Executive of the Soil Association. And then right at the far end, we've got Matt Culley, who's an arable farmer and chair of the NFU Crops Board as well. So a really good panel. Now, I thought I'd start off just by framing things a bit, and then I'm going to ask some questions of each of our panel members in the usual way. But then I hopefully allow plenty of time for you to ask questions as well. And we've got our glamorous assistant, Sam, somewhere towards the back, who's going to run around with a microphone in about half an hour, so you can ask questions, and we will attempt to answer them. But first of all, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the topic in a way. So why are we here as RSPB? Well, we've got some skin in the game. So we have Hope Farm, which is our demonstration farm in Cambridgeshire, which is an arable farm and contract farm for us by Martin. But we also farm about another 20,000 hectares across the UK in a whole mixture of different ways. But we're also interested in farming from a number of different angles as well. We work hard to try and influence farming policy to move it in a nature-friendly direction. We also offer advice to farmers, so we have an advisory service. And we also have a certification scheme called Fair to Nature, which is all about how we can get products coming out of the farming system that are produced in a way that is nature-friendly. So we have lots of different angles on farming from our perspective, but I suppose the most important way in which we have skin in the game is that we're completely clear that we will not be able to halt and then reverse a decline in nature without our farming helping us do that. It's absolutely fundamental. If you read some of the reports about the state of nature globally and in the UK, it's really clear that our food system needs to change in order to get that reverse in nature's decline happening and restoration coming through the system. So that's mainly why we have skin in the game. It's because of that. So I thought I'd say a little bit about nature positive, which is this kind of phrase that's doing the rounds. It's all about basically having human and planetary health both working alongside each other and allowing us all to thrive. There's just been an announcement this week, actually, about the Convention on Biodiversity actually happening at long last. It's going to take place in Montreal this year in December, which is all about setting the next big global framework for how we can restore nature. And I think that's going to probably set some goals, hopefully around 30% of land and sea being restored for nature, and also making sure that we've got kind of some really important targets around species who are actually the ultimate outcome of a healthy natural system. So targets around abundance of species, which is about how many you have of each species, and targets around halting extinction of species as well. So we're really hopeful that that will, in December, set a new global framework. But we've also got things happening on a domestic level as well. So here in the UK, we've got some really important targets that we've set ourselves. So we obviously have a net zero target. We also have the Environment Bill, which has come through in England, which has set some targets for halting species decline by 2030. We've had the Agriculture Bill come through. We've just had the government response to the food strategy come through. So there are some really important bits of policy and legislation which are framing this work for us. But basically, we've had 50 years of inappropriate farming policy that has really driven us in a direction where food and farming and nature have become very separate from each other and are no longer able to kind of deliver that joined up, holistic trajectory that we all need. And on top of that, we also have Brexit. In 2018, we had the great moment when we thought we were going to realise, depending on how you look at it, one of the benefits of Brexit, which was to have the Health and Harmony report come through in 2018, which basically introduced the concept of public money for public goods and basically said we needed a new environmental land management system which would actually bring benefits in terms of carbon, nature and so on from our farming system. But then, of course, on top of that, we've had the pandemic. We've had now the cost of living crisis and all the news that's been coming through this week about increasing inflationary rates. And we've got the impact of the war in Ukraine. And that's kind of sending through some quite big counter-narratives against what came through in terms of health and harmony. So we've got those counter-narratives running about food production and the importance of food security coming back through. So it's an interesting situation that we find ourselves in with that response to the National Food Strategy coming out this week. And one of the things I really want to explore in this panel is, how can policy help us get to that kind of nature positive by 2030 target, and how can farming really help us do that? And is it policy that will help us do that, or is there more that we need on top of that? And are there differences to that policy framework that we really need to see? So I'm going to turn to Jake, first of all, to kick us off. And Jake, the question I wanted to ask you is really about the role of farmers and farming in achieving nature positive by 2030. Can we do it without farmers and farming, or do we really need them? And maybe a little bit about what helped you take Holcombe in that nature positive direction, and what elements of government policy helped with that, and what more would you like to see?
Okay, 70% of the UK is in agriculture. So it makes complete sense that agriculture plays a role in meeting the 30 by 30 objectives. 40% of habitable land is in agriculture. There are 570 million farmers globally. 500 million of those farmers, those farm businesses, only farm 2 hectares. 60% of those farm businesses are susceptible to climate change. So we really need to look on how we're going to produce food at a global level. And agriculture, although it's the most destructive industry on the planet, according to some commentators, I believe that actually it's probably the most positive, has the potential to be the most positive solution to some of these climate and biodiversity issues. So that's a holistic view. But if I look at Holcombe, so how did I influence Holcombe? So I was first described as the disruptor when I arrived 3.5 years ago, and the first decision I made was to give Lord Leicester, the Holcombe Farms director, the farm manager, and the estates director a copy of Dirt to Soil for Christmas, and I said, "Happy Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year." And that was the catalyst of change. They read that, so Holcombe has a long history of agricultural change and innovation. And I think like no other, like every other agricultural business globally, actually, we saw this change in direction that had significant impacts on climate and also biodiversity. So giving that book to them actually enthused them to look at the way they were producing their food and how they can make changes. So they were doing some great stuff, but actually I challenged them to do bigger and better and bolder stuff. And that has taken place. So we see, the Holcombe National Nature Reserve, which is just under 10,000 acres, is effectively, as I see it, is effectively a farm business. So it does have sand dunes and salt marsh and a beach, but it also has 2,500 acres of freshwater grazing marsh, which is grazed by cattle. But actually the cattle are the ecosystem drivers for the biodiversity. They are the ones that see the lapwing population spring back to its levels from 2000. They are the ones that see the spoonbill population double in 3 years. They are the ones that see the natterjack toad population have record spawning. So the integration of agriculture to help and assist biodiversity can be done. We then move to the arable elements of Holcombe, which are significant, and we look at, the Holcombe's Cook of Norfolk's 4-crop rotation. Actually, we need to extend that rotation. We look at cover crops, cash crops. We need ensuring making space for nature, looking at the way we manage our hedgerows. We have more miles of hedgerows in the UK than we do sealed roads. They are the stitching that holds the patchwork quilt of our landscape together. And actually, they can have significant benefits to some of the species that have seen significant declines. They can reverse those. So I'm not the implementer, but I'm the disruptor. But it's the way you frame it. It's ensuring that you put it in a language that they understand. And I'm talking about hay meadows, I'm talking about cultivation, I'm talking about resting periods or fallows. These are agricultural terms, so I'm not seen as this green environmentalist trying to change the way they do. I want them to take ownership of it and them to deliver it. And that has seen successes.
Great. Thank you, Jake. So that's I don't know how many of you have been to Holcombe, but it's quite a visionary place to go and see some of this stuff happening on the ground. It really is an exciting place to be. But I wanted to kind of turn to you now, Matt, actually, and ask you the question. So that all sounds great. And Jake has kind of, given his boss a book for Christmas, and it's all kind of turned into kind of a fairy story. But turning to you, Matt, I'm really interested to know, what would it help and persuade more farmers to take action towards kind of nature positive? What do they need? And is there more that we could do to help them?
Okay, so I think firstly, we need to look at the land sharing aspects of what we do on farm and land sharing with nature. I think it's vitally important that we look at and understand and recognise what we do already on our farms. So the improvement in soil health, exploring the new farming models with more integration of livestock and agroecology. And forestry also, the improvement and focusing on our inputs, our resource use efficiency and our nutrient use efficiency, and what's going on farm, I think is really key already to understand. We need to understand the financial support that's available at the moment, moving to a more transition to a regen ag and farming systems. Really understanding what we're doing at the moment is a great starting point before we actually address some of the challenges of what we need. And the challenges are for a lot of our members and growers, lack of evidence, lack of data of where they are, what they need to do. We need to start counting more of what we do, so we can progress properly. Are there too many frameworks that aren't aligned? Is there too much information? Is there information overkill? Too many people pointing people in different directions? So I think it's something we can really look at in that respect. And in terms of policy, we know the BPS, the reduction in BPS is coming. So the things like the SFI pilot, which I'm involved in a pilot at home, are really key to see what the government can deliver going forward and encourage growers to get involved and farm in a more regen way or more nature positive way. And what would help in that, again, it's the financial incentives to push farmers in the right directions in the BPS replacement, access to payments for better ecosystems and services, and that again goes back to data for people to fully understand what they're trying to achieve, and maybe looking at the regionalisation of food production as well. How can we shorten our supply chains and work in a more local, regionalised way? It all has an impact on what we do and ultimately an impact on the profitability of our farms. So going back to what I said at the start, nature and farming going hand in hand, production must be key in that, and land sparing, not land sharing, would be a good place to start. Hopefully we'll get some questions on it later, but some of the some of the skills that we need, I think, is key. I don't think we have enough skills based on the way we need to move forward in terms of regen and nature positive farming, knowledge exchange, how groups of farmers can get together and exchange their views. Because, if you look at the event today, I mean, it's the first time I've been here, and it really is an eye-opener. So places like this that build and build and build and engage with the normal farmer, the normal grower, has to be pushed further and harder. And how that's done, you can do it at local level, you can do it through WhatsApp groups, you can do so much with engagement if we put our mind to it. But I think policy ultimately is key for many members, and we are in a bit of flux with policy, and I don't think it's unfair to say that. I think we're not seeing the rollout of SFI as quickly as we liked. We haven't got a good oversight of what ELMS, the land recovery scheme and the local nature recovery schemes are going to be. So there is a bit of flux there. Ultimately, I think a lot of growers at the moment could look towards stewardship as their holding place and get involved more with stewardship, and that will help them make their transition maybe to the SFI when it's fully available.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So I'm hearing kind of good data. I'm hearing kind of knowledge sharing and building that skill and competence. I'm hearing simplification of the system, the right kind of incentivization, and kind of a regionalisation, perhaps, of all of that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. You mentioned supply chain, and I wanted to turn to Martin to ask a question around this, Martin. So, what support do farmers need from within the supply chain in order to kind of move towards this kind of nature positive goal? And how can farmers, work together to ensure that the supply chain is more supportive for them and ensure sort of fair prices as we kind of go along that trajectory? And you've got a lot of experience around thinking about this, I know.
I think it's through the supply chain is that market recognition that food and farming is different. We have some really good quality, good standard of farming that delivers for nature and for soil health and other aspects. And we have some farming systems that aren't delivering for nature. And how do we incentivise through those marketplaces the recognition that we have different production systems? That's not just in the UK, that's globally. And then we can actually focus incentives that if you are producing in a way that's putting nature back into your landscape and you value it within your farming system that helps you produce the food, adds for pollinators and public goods, that can then build into their supply chains. And those corporate companies and supply chains needs to not just measure carbon, they need to be net positive in their supply chains to make sure the positive effect comes right down to those farmers on the ground. And it's about that knowledge sharing between farmers so they can actually understand, how do we get there? How do we make this farming system work that has that market recognition through that supply chain? But also those supply chains and some leading brands and labelling systems, how are you helping advice get on the farm for those farmers? Because this is, for many farmers, very different. We were brought up to focus on production, animal welfare, not about nature. And many of us haven't got that knowledge of biodiversity and which bits do we want, which bits of the pollinators give us the most outcomes, where are the data and the research that show how much do we need on our landscapes to increase productivity, and join that up into the supply chain and make those suppliers and that retailers be proud of where they get their food from and put the farmer face right at the front and centre, that this landscape is producing this net positive for biodiversity and for carbon. And I think the two got to go joined together, because if we just do the nature, we miss the carbon, and if we just do the carbon, we'll bugger up the nature. So I think it's about getting that supply chain to recognise it, hopefully positively reward it, but even just the recognition to squeeze out the other side. Because there is actually farming in a way that puts nature at the heart, and nature means business, actually makes your business more profitable. Because if you add it in and get the balance right, as many of the farmers and regen farmers and that, working with soil and that actually is the most profitable place. Getting the marketplace recognition will add to it. And then it's about farmers joining together, because while working together and championing those systems, but joining products together, because if you're a big miller, you want volume. But if you can join lots of farmers together, you can produce the volume across the country, but also you can share the knowledge and also the local food supply, because then you can actually make those markets really work locally. And we've seen lots of examples of that been really happening, that labels and companies are now recognising regenerative or fair to nature or other labelling systems that are delivering that nature positive stuff right on the ground. And I think it's about how do we engage those farmers to see that opportunity and hold the supply chain's feet to the fire. If their supply chain is degrading nature and carbon on a landscape, that's greenwash, it's pants. And we're seeing lots of it. We're seeing lots of companies maybe turning up here for the first time, thinking they can just put some greenwash on it. We've got to hold them to account that actually, is that effect having a positive outcome? And is it helping underpin the food supply for the future by having a healthy landscape?
Thank you. So very good point made there around kind of accountability of the supply chain and the risks of greenwash. But also, I heard lots there about kind of recognition as well as value and kind of pushing farming more into the heart of that supply chain and getting it out to that kind of consumer and public-facing interface, which was really interesting. So thank you for that, Martin. Some good thoughts there. Helen, I'm going to come to you last, but by no means least, to really kind of give us that sort of view on policy. I mean, we've just had the government's response to the food strategy, and I'd love to know kind of what you thought of it, really, and do you think it will help deliver that kind of nature-positive food and farming system? Is there more that we need to see from government in this space?
Thanks, Becky. Yes, so we were a big fan of the Dimbleby plan. And so overall, I have to say I'm pretty disappointed that it wasn't just accepted in its entirety and implemented, because this does feel like a moment where we need those kind of big changes and fast. It's not really a strategy. It's a collection of policies, some of which are already in operation. Some of them are being kicked down the road for another day, things that are kind of come through. Some of that is quite good. There's talk of a land use framework. A number of us have been talking about that. Sounds very boring. But actually, decisions about what we're going to do where on our land and how we're going to incentivize the right things and how we're going to get this multifunctional rural economy and countryside that we all know we need is really crucial. And so having some way of doing that, of both top down a bit in terms of what are the rules of the game, but actually real engagement with the people on the ground who are going to be affected by what goes on in their place, that feels a really important step forward. And they're promising that for next year, so there's a lot of work to do to try and make sure that this is delivered into something that's meaningful and actually is going to work with people on the ground to try and build it bottom up as well as top down. But there were an awful lot of things that weren't in the government's response, and some of them, we're told, are coming through the white paper, and the health white paper further down the road, so we'll wait and see. Or makes me feel really tired because you think, my God, we've still got to keep working away on all this stuff. None of it's kind of over the line. But I actually feel a little bit like, even though the response was spun around food security, I think with a really political end, just before the Tiverton by-election, where I think the Prime Minister realised he was losing the rural vote. And I'm all for food security. I think one of the things we need to be thinking about is how do we make sure that as we move to more nature-friendly farming, how do we keep food in the mix? And that's what today's panel is all about. But despite that spin, I felt that the punchline, or the lack of a punchline to this strategy was really hollow. There is nothing in there about the trade issue other than saying we'll abide by the sort of phytosanitary rules. So we've still got a government that's divided as to whether they're going to allow the import of things that could undermine all the good work that's being done in the UK. There was no budgetary commitment to 2029, which was one of the other Dimbleby asks, so we can still see that budgets are being fought over, that there may not be the investment that we need to make this kind of thing happen. And as I say, things that we care about at the Soil Association a lot, like how we feed people, the junk food issue is being kicked down the road in terms of let's do more research and then we can delay action for another few centuries. And actually, time is running out on some of this stuff. So yeah, that's what I thought of that. Where do I think in terms of are we going to see nature-friendly farming coming through? I think some of the work that's being done around elms, and I think we will see habitat creation. I think we are already seeing markets starting to work in good ways and bad. There's more more habitat being established around the place. I think the tricky bit is still the farming bit of it, where it doesn't feel as though, as farmers, we've got that clarity of direction and the support for that transition. And I think the big thing that would make a difference, actually, is for all of us as farmers, and this is why Groundswell is so amazing, is to realise that nature is actually jolly useful. Nature actually does a lot of our job for us if we can work with it in the right kind of way. And the more I'm talking to farmers who are, pioneering new approaches, and the more they're recognising, get their soils right, get your beneficial insects right, actually, we can move away from a lot of these products which have been so destructive over time. And it doesn't feel like policy that's doing that. It feels like farmers getting their act together, learning from each other, doing things like this. That's where it feels like the hope is. And what do we need of government now? Well, we really do need them to join up their thinking across government departments. I know nobody says that always, but it really is a problem when food actually affects every part of our lives and therefore almost every government department. We need that joining up to happen. We need to get that investment long term. There is such a case to be made that if we are going to rescue the health of our nation, that we need to invest in the way that we as farmers would invest in our livestock, knowing that if we don't get that stuff right when they're going to be sick and not any good to us, we need to be investing in our people in the same way and making the case for so much more funding and effort to be deployed at building a healthy population. And that starts with building a healthy food and farming system. So we need a lot more leadership around all of this. I don't know where it's going to come from. And we need to make sure that farmers who are doing all this brilliant work are being funded, that the research work is being backed. Big fan of farmer-led research and making sure that more of the funding goes in that direction. So loads to do. Some of it feels like we're going to have to do for ourselves. But government overall needs to be making it absolutely a no-brainer for us as farmers to be doing the right thing because it makes economic sense to do that. Anything less than that is an absolute failure at a time when the world needs nature-friendly farming and food in a way like never before.
Great, thank you, Helen. I couldn't agree more. I think I'm a bit famous at work for kind of talking about the nature and the climate emergency, blowing hot air on the back of my neck every morning when I wake up, and I really do feel that. And we are in a very, very urgent situation around both. And the thing that worries me about kind of the food strategy is not only that the response was weak, but that, as you say, it kicks things down the road, and we just don't have that time left to play with. But I do come to somewhere like here and look out at all of you and kind of feel the hope in the room and kind of think, yes, this is where the answer is going to lie. It's not going to lie, actually, in the hands of politicians. Let's hope I'm right. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to you to ask questions. We've got a very knowledgeable panel here. I will try and direct questions where I think they are best answered, but can all of you just kind of wave at me if you particularly want to come in on something as well? The glamorous Sam is in action. I can see, yep, he's going over here. Lady in blue.
Hello, thank you very much. It's good to see such a diverse panel of people from maybe arguably what would traditionally have been at odds with each other coming together. Is that fair to say? Maybe that's the wrong thing to say, I don't know.
More in common, I suspect.
More in common, okay, good. So I agree with Helen Browning that we've got a real problem, that there's no systems thinking in government. And so that's why we're bouncing around all over the place with this. I wondered if you knew about that the government's just confirmed it's going to consult on carbon border adjustment. That happened yesterday, and how you think that might benefit, what we're all trying to achieve here in terms of short supply chains. But I suppose my main question is around corporate capture of our systems, and so how we can possibly succeed with all our virtuous thinking, when in fact there is corporate capture. Big money has got capture not only of our government and policy and legislation, but also of the media system and also of the ag industry, supply chains.
Great. I think we'll probably answer that probably from the perspective of the food system. It's probably the one where we're best off kind of answering that on, in terms of kind of big business in the food system. And is that going to just kind of sort of prevent any of this stuff happening, I suppose, is the question, isn't it? So who wants to come in on that? Martin? Yep.
So I think it's about keeping the power in the farmers' hands and not just giving away our assets and our ability to do positive things. We've seen lots of corporate brands trying to say they can do things, but it's how do we help keep the power and the value in the farmers' hands and make sure that is really the key driver, and don't give away our assets and our ability to do things and get the value to come down to the bottom of the chain where we are doing the action, not the corporate greenwashing. And just on the carbon piece, it's great to see the government actually considering that. They have been talking about it behind closed doors for a little bit. Many other countries are already looking at, they're so far ahead. And it's not just carbon, they're also looking around the biodiversity impacts. And I think if we can get the biodiversity and the carbon matrix right, that will deliver really positive trading globally that delivers positive things for farmers and for our environment and nature. And it's about getting that balance.
Yeah, I'd go for carbon, nature, and animal welfare border adjustments. I think carbon is a step forward, but you can get some perverse outcomes if you just look at the carbon issues. But it's a step in the right direction. I think it is. I've always worried about feeling conspiratorial about the way corporate capture kind of influences where we end up. But I think we have to acknowledge that in the food system there are a few companies that do have a very strong interest for all sorts of understandable reasons. It doesn't mean they're evil, it just means their business model is actually in a place, a bit like this is the case in some of the fossil fuel industries, which is not actually fit for purpose in the future. And the question is, what is their business model going forward? What is the good death and rebirth of those kind of corporates? Maybe broken down a bit, because actually I think that we have too much market concentration in some places. But I think really thinking that through, because if you don't find a way through for some of those activities, then they will cause all sorts of problems in their death throes as they try and prevent change. We know we need to change, so we need all actors to be up for that change rather than standing in the way of the progress. And that's what worries me about big corporates whose business model is now unsustainable in every shape and form.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the corporates, I think some of them are starting to realise that there's a different way there, and looking at supply chains, especially in our sector, in the combinable crop sector, you are starting to see grower groups come together, working for specific end users, and they are looking at their sustainability within those growing groups, looking at how they farm within nature and adding premium, adding value into that growers group. And that those chains are starting to develop. And I think it's really key that we are, as an industry, we're in a place to support that and expand that as well. And that means farmer collaboration, farmer to farmer working, whether it be through producer organisations or grain co-ops, those sort of things where you can join up everything that comes from a cluster of growers and supply a specific end user and supply what the consumer demands, which is if the consumer is demanding the sustainability and the nature positive farming, and that growth starts to happen, accelerate more quickly, then we need to be in a place where we can meet those demands. So producer organisations, farmer co-ops, those could be real key ways of moving that forward.
Thank you. Do you want to come in, Jake?
So there are effectively 4 major global corporations that have a complete stranglehold on food and ag business globally. But I do feel that there is greenwashing aside, there is a real interest from corporations and pension funds that actually they know that the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss will impact their businesses going forward. And they are looking for mechanisms and ways to start to invest in nature or nature, biodiversity, climate change, carbon, whatever you want to call it. It's about saving the planet for the future generations, and they are starting to recognise it. Our problem is that there's a translation issue. where we talk one thing and they talk something else. And I think we need to try to facilitate that language and how we negotiate the change, because global corporations have billions available. They have trillions, and governments only have billions. Government's role in this is to facilitate the ability for corporates to invest, ensuring that those investments aren't greenwashing but are meaningful. And I think we have this wonderful opportunity currently with, to be honest, my belief is COVID and conflict will help accelerate this change. We don't like to talk about it, and we see huge inflation prices and all the impacts in filling your car up, but actually that will only accelerate an electric industry. That will accelerate the reduction in artificial inputs into our food systems. So there are positives to be taken this, and these are cyclical. So we've seen this before, and there is always change. After conflict, there is always significant change and improvement and investment, and hopefully it'll be a more nature-positive investment as opposed to what we saw following the Second World War, and I'm not trying to compare the two, where we saw the investment into artificial fertilizer. The creation of the flail mower was created as a bomb disposal unit in the Second World War, and now we use it for maintaining our hedges. So hopefully we will see the use of drones and all these wonderful technologies that are being used in the far use to huge detriment and discourse. But actually, we can see these potentially there will be benefits to come out of this, and that, I really feel that there is a positive element that hopefully we can engage with through conversation and engaging with as many different businesses and individuals and working together. And it's about having conversation. It's about having dialogue, and I think that is really key in this moment in time.
If you were just going to do just one thing, as Michael Mosley does on Radio 4, for nature-friendly farming, what would it be?
Good question. Just one thing, nature-friendly farming. What are you going to do?
What, on our own farms?
Yep.
Okay. So on my farm, I'm actually pursuing SFI pilot. I'm looking at countryside stewardship, revisiting where I was from ELS, look at the good work that I did on my farm through ELS, and then looking at stewardship on my farms as well. And the reason I want to do that, I mean, the pilot is a really good way of gathering the information I think the SFI might give us long term, and how that will build into the elms. But also, I'm looking at the fact that, I know my direct payments are reducing, and the direct payments are going to be reducing of the people that I've managed the farms for, and my customers that I look after. And we have to look at where we're going to go now with those, and secure the financial viability of our systems and our farms. So those are the two first steps for me. And then it's a continued understanding, gaining skills on nutrient use efficiency, reduction on inputs, and a more regenerative way of farming our soils. How that works out, I really don't know, because even where I farm, the range of soils and the range of sites just in a 5-mile radius is massive. So it's going to take a lot of work and education to do that.
Thank you for that very honest answer. Thank you. Helen?
Oh, just to keep it short, I'm going to plant more trees, actually, or allow more trees to grow, because you don't have to plant them all, and make sure we look after the ones that we do plant. Right tree, right place, all that sort of stuff, loads of caveats. But actually, we just need loads more trees everywhere, in all of our pastures, in all of our arable cropping lands, everywhere. We need more trees.
Martin?
I don't think it's as simple as just one thing, but the one thing you should think about is put nature back in your landscape, and it'll help your production system. Whether that's earthworms, pollinators, we all have different farms and different businesses, but put nature back in your landscape.
Protect, preserve, enhance, restore.
That's 4 things.
Yeah. So they all cheated, sorry. Apart from Matt, who was very honest at the end. Oh, and Helen with her trees. Okay, I'm going to come over here. There's a chap right at the far end with a beard. If any of my descriptions offend you, please forgive me.
No, he's used to that.
Can you hear me? Hello? Very good. Yes. Yeah, Richard Bramley, farmer from Yorkshire. You kind of touched on the aspect of supply chains. I've had a lot of experience with supply chains and Boo Hiss Farm Assurance as well. And there's a real reluctance for them to put their hands in the pocket. Now, I appreciate that long term, everybody's got to be farming on the same level, but we need input to get there. So the question is, what thing could be done to really drive that within the supply chains? And then briefly, to pick up on a point you made, Beccy, at the beginning, 50 years of policy that's been inappropriate. It's 30 years since Rio. We've had stewardships of various manifestations. Why hasn't it worked?
Okay. Right. Should we go supply chain first and then Rio? Do you want to do supply chain?
Me?
Yeah.
No, not really.
So this is really about inputs and how do we get input reduction?
Yeah.
I mean, I think in a way, and that, again, that's one of the reasons I'm so enthused by things like Groundswell. In a way, I think we need, as farmers, to learn how, if we get the basics right, we don't need those inputs in the first place. So I think that actually, rather than, if that's answering the question, it's not answering the question. He's shaking his head.
Yeah. So how do you drive the value out of the supply chain? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The question, now I understand it more clearly, is how do you actually get the value of different systems across to the consumer through the market, through the supply chain? And I guess you've got a number of schemes that have ended up trying to do that. I mean, obviously that's what we've tried to do in the organic world, is to say, look, here's a set of standards, and here's how that is valued in the marketplace, and here's the label that gives you the confidence around that. And you've got Leaf, and you've got Red Tractor, and you've got some of that, I guess, going on there at the moment. But I guess your premise is that even within that, there's more subtlety. We need to upscale it. So yes, okay, lots more. And I think it's really interesting trying to look at, I'm very focused at the Soil Association on the outcomes of farming. How do we actually start to measure not just the systems, but a basket of outcomes so that you can start to say, to give a more meaningful score than just a pass-fail on a scheme. So I think there's lots of work going on in that area. And we've got to ask the question, how much can your average consumer absorb in terms of information? How do we actually... But we can lift the standards, is what you're suggesting, in those schemes and trying to make them more meaningful for people.
Martin, did you want to come in?
Yeah, we need clear labelling systems. We've got so many different schemes and different ways of interpreting stuff. What is the matrix? How does it measure nature positively and carbon positively through the production system and that? And the consumer will choose, whether it's traffic lights or whatever. And there are some labelling, global labelling systems and opportunities to make that work. And we need to get behind them and push this government. They're doing a consultation on clear labelling to actually make our products that stand out differently in a different method of production clearly stand out on the shelf. And then they must be promoted. There's no point promoting stuff on a supermarket shelf that's causing harm. So there's a whole load of other levers to sort of stop the harmful stuff getting that promotion, and having clearly defined products that the consumer can then choose.
Jake, can I ask you to come in on perhaps on the kind of the Rio question? So we've had all this stuff happening for the past, 30 years or whatever. We've had kind of, countryside stewardship. We've had all of this. Why hasn't it worked?
Rio, Paris, Glasgow, broken promises, again and again we've seen it. So I think it's simplicity, it's complex, it's over prescriptions, it's nuance and context. You cannot have. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Matt talking about his various soil types on his farm. He might apply one thing on one soil type and apply something else on the other. So we need, we saw a huge uptake of ELS, those of you that remember ELS, because that was basically a knee-jerk reaction by the industry because it had a 30% reduction in its direct support. So, and that's why that didn't work. And we had this wonderful opportunity to deliver something. And there's been such a lot of progression in the delivery of nature-positive farming in the last 10 years. And we learn from others, and we learn from different experiences on what works on each individual's farm. So I think we mustn't give up on it. And I think, so if I look at 2 reviews that have had a response, so Glover and Food Strategy. The one review we haven't had a response from is Descriptor, which was commissioned by the Treasury, which is about how we value nature. So once we put a value on something that we've never paid for this wonderful view, exclude the Fendt tractor, but the wonderful view across the British countryside. We don't pay for that view, but we need to put a value on it. And once we put a value on it, then that creates the market and that creates the investment. So don't give up. I know there are farmers out there doing amazing stuff. There are farmers that are resistant to it, but actually we need the whole community come on this journey.
Yeah, I would just come in on that as well and say, so we have Hope Farm, which is a conventional arable farm in Cambridgeshire, where we put various kind of interventions in, like thickening up of hedgerows, proper margins, a little bit of agroforestry, all that kind of stuff. And we have baselined the numbers in terms of kind of birds and kind of butterflies and insect counts, and we have seen that farm absolutely be transformed. It's not organic. It's just where we have put those interventions in. And my gut instinct is, without any of those schemes over the past kind of 30 odd years, we'd be in a lot worse state than we are now. But has it driven restoration? No, it hasn't. But it could, if we make sure that the standards that we set at the bottom of those schemes and the ratcheting up of those schemes is enough to really drive that restoration. But I don't think we're talking about extremes here. But I think we need to make sure that those standards are proper and are really driving that change. And I think that's what hasn't necessarily been in place. So I think it's also about kind of how we think about our land use. Helen was talking about one of the good things to come out of the response to the National Food Strategy being that kind of spatial kind of view of land use, and I think that's going to be really important going forward as well.
I think in terms of Rio and where we've been in the last 30 years, I mean, do we actually know where we are as an industry? Because, I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, I was in an ELS agreement for 10 years. I flipped all that agreement into my greening. A lot of it was voluntary. I carried on with the voluntary stuff. In those 15 years, I've not had one inspection on my farm, not one bird count by Natural England, by DEFRA. I'm quite openly admit I'm not a skilled ornithologist. I don't count birds. I know I've got skylarks because I can hear them.
We'll come and count for you.
Well, so it does slightly answer the question, how do we know where we are? And I think that's really important for us to understand in our biodiversity and in what we've done and what we've achieved. But we also need to know that to understand where we need to go. And in terms of the supply chain, we've got to be very careful, Richard, about that we don't oversell ourselves through standards and standardization of our achievements. We need to respond to consumer demand, but we cannot change rapidly if the demand from the consumer isn't there. And I think that will change over time. But we've got to be very, very careful that we do not allow what we can achieve to just be standardized through any particular auditing process and given away for nothing. We need to ensure that we support our growers in terms of what premiums and what they can gain out of the market through what we are going to do, because what we are going to do is going to be quite significant in terms of what we can give to the public.
Thank you. Lady here. Nice green top.
My question is about carbon. There's a lot of talk about carbon here. I've not been here before, but I'm being quite shocked at how much how much people are talking about it. And particularly, Martin, your comment about soil carbon, and perhaps there could be greenwashing if we're not doing this properly. And I was wondering, do you think that the science is there on carbon? And if it's not, then is this all a bit dodgy? Like, do we risk kind of people losing confidence in this market if we're sort of making up our own numbers about soil carbon and actually people don't know? Yeah. And if that's the case, should we be putting the brake on it a bit?
Okay, yeah. So the science behind soil carbon, is it there?
The science is there. You build soil health and organic matter, it improves things, it's locking carbon in. But what matrix are you measuring it? What system are we measuring it? There are so many calculators and measurements and people who are selling it. We haven't got a standardisation. And that's not just in the UK, that's globally. Because if we're going to trade through that measure, we need standardisation so we all play off the same sheet. So I think we don't want to stifle it, but we do need that regulation and framework. And we need the government to step up to set that framework and then let the market work. What my real concern is in a year or two's time, one or two journalists may investigate a company or two and find out actually what they're doing is not making any real difference to carbon, and they're selling a story. And that will kill the market before it starts. And we need to lock carbon out the atmosphere into our soil and into our environment through trees and green products. And it's the only way, really. It's not about cattle blowing off and other things and burping. It's about how we farm and lock carbon out of the atmosphere into our ground and in our environment. We need that framework.
I'm going to just ask Helen to make a comment because this, Soil Association, and you've been doing soils long before the rest of us. What's your view on it?
Well, I largely agree with what Martin said, actually. I think that we do need, a lot of us are working together to try and get a soil carbon code agreed. We've got a woodland carbon code, a peatland carbon code, so we're clearer how to audit for those. We need a soil carbon code so that everybody is playing by the same rules. Soils are more complicated. I think we do need to be careful about trading. I mean, it's very important to be measuring it and developing it, but trading soil carbon until we have some clear rules of the game. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. One more, and then we'll have to wrap it up. Yeah, chap here.
Hi there. So we hear a lot here about all the great examples of people farming really well. But I think it's acknowledged by most people. I think Martin covered it with the labelling point, that there are examples of farms, farmers and farming practices which aren't sustainable, either financially or environmentally. And I wondered whose job it is to talk to those farmers and help support them to change what they're doing. My personal view being that the government hasn't made the scale and pace of change needed clear enough, despite the fact that they're rewriting policy in a very radical way.
All right, so whose job is it to help those farmers along the way? Matt?
Well, it's certainly going to be the job of an organisation like the NFU. I think we've always been an organisation that's never told our members how to farm. But it's been an organisation that will look for positive ways of facilitating change that they can take up on their farms. I think we need to step that up. We are doing good member engagement on soils, on net zero, but we need to step that up and pick up as many people as we can. And to help achieve that, we need to look at better advocacy work with some of our members who are doing really great things. We've done that with our soils paper. And we also need to look outside of our organisation as well and make sure we work with other organisations who want to achieve the same goals. Because I don't think it's going to be any one single organisation that helps promote the better engagement. But I think the messaging, simplified, correct messaging together with other organisations will get more take-up. But, yeah, I mean, for an organisation like ours, with the 47,000 members we've got, we need to be at forefront of this, and I think we are. I think we're getting there. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think we're getting there.
Okay, thank you, Helen.
I think it's really hard for the NFU as a membership charity to call out bad practice amongst its members, because you are reliant on those members. I think farmers hate calling out other farmers who aren't doing it right, quite understandably, but actually, if we're not going to get our reputation dragged down by the bad practice that is out there in places, we've probably got to get tougher on ourselves and be clearer about how these things have got to happen. I think regulation and the regulators need to do a better job too, and we need to then be giving people a chance to get their act together, and that might require investment, because we know a lot of the problems on farms are things like leaky manure systems and all that kind of stuff. But I do think it's there has got to be a way of pulling up very fast the bottom 20% or whatever it is who are just not getting it.
Jake.
10%, you're very generous. So where there's change, there's opportunity, and there will be winners and losers. And there are good farmers, and there are okay farmers, and there are bad farmers. There's something I'm always amazed. I drove down a North Norfolk lane last week, and the farmer was flailing his hedges. I know most other farmers aren't allowed to do that till the 1st September. And you just can't call them out. We have this, there was there's that horrible social media thing, I can't remember what it's called, it begins with T. And there was quite a prominent farmer called out some really bad practice on habitat management, destructive. And it made a front page of the Farmers Weekly, because this was something that was novel. But I think we do. It doesn't necessarily need to be the NFU. It needs to be, how we have conversations with those that aren't necessarily farming in an environmental or sustainable manner. I think we need to change as an industry. We need to, actually focus and actually try to win people over. And if that's calling them out, if those that are completely resistant to change, I think we do. And it only takes one or two examples that facilitate that greater change. I'm not going to do it myself, but because I'm just.
There's always someone else's job.
Yeah. Okay.
Get that.
So, listen, we're coming to the end of our time. So I just wanted to ask our panel kind of very, very short answers to this last question, really, which is don't look at me like that. Which is, listen. Basically, I work for an organisation, and I'm absolutely passionate about a world where people and nature are thriving. That's what the RSPB is working to try and achieve. We know we're kind of running out of time, looking at the numbers that cross my desk every day, looking at what I see out around me. We're running out of time. And we also know, as Jake said, that farming occupies, the vast majority of our land use here in the UK. So I know damn well that unless we get farming moving in the right direction, we ain't going to win in terms of nature. And our kids will be living in a very, very nature-depleted world. So, million-dollar question for the end of the panel is, sitting right here, right now, and knowing that we're trying to move onto that nature-positive trajectory by 2030, out of 10, where 10 is feeling really, really positive about it, and 1 is feeling really, really negative about it, what's your score for where we are right now? And I'm going to come to Jake first.
At Holcombe, I'd give it a 9. Driving from Holcombe to Groundswell, I'd give it a 5.
Martin.
5 to 6. We need some clear leadership from everybody within our industry to get to where we need to get to at pace. There is hope, but we're not doing it fast enough and in a good enough way. And it goes back to that earlier point. We all have got to champion what we need to do and talk to those who can't do it.
Helen.
I think I'd normally give it a 5. Everything's in the balance, it feels like, But when I'm here, I'd give it at least a 7.
The wave of optimism, yeah.
Bearing in mind what I said earlier on and what I witnessed here and what I witnessed driving around the country in terms of people I speak to, I'm far more positive, and I would give it a 7.
Great, okay. So we're either on the cusp or we're just moving in the right direction. My challenge to all of you here today is, how do we get it to a 9, not just at Holcombe, but everywhere? Because we need to do it, and we need to do it fast. Thank you very much.